they say in these Long Islands, no neutrals can belong. You'll either be a union man or a thug for Sid Holland. Thug for Sid Holland. Say, which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on? Which side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?
For those of you who are perhaps new to us, every year we award, we look at all of the works in labour history from the previous year, and we shortlist a bunch of them, and then we make an award to that which we, as a subcommittee, decide best depicts the history of work and resistance in New Zealand. We take a really broad stance on what is labour, heart, mind, hands, as well as how we might think of exploitation and resistance as well. We have 9 amazing works that I just want to spend a little bit of time introducing you all to, if you haven't met them already on our shortlist, because they're all worth engaging with. So I'm just going to speak to them alphabetically by author. So the first on our list is Rosemary Beard's The Middle of Nowhere, Stories of Working on the Manapodi Hydro Project, which is published with Canterbury University Press. For 9 years, from 1963 to 1972, hundreds of men worked to build the Manapodi power station. The work was hard, physical, it was a rough and isolated environment. Rosemary Beard does an amazing job of bringing together oral history interviews that she's conducted and a large number of images to tell the stories of this time. Next on our list is Graham Clark's It's Not My Fault, brought out with Rebel Press. Graham Clark's life story unfolds from the decision he made in 1971 as a young radical to go and work at Todd Motors and organise the union. So there is a basic truth to the title. Graham Clark was one of the many people who resisted neoliberal changes that weren't enacted by a whole generation, but those people in power. And by telling his life story as a series of smaller struggles, he makes those struggles really accessible to all of us. Next up, we have an article by the amazing Jared Davison called Class in Colonial Aotearoa, an alternative historiography, where he argues that class should not be understood as a that class should be understood as a social and cultural formation which cannot be defined abstractly or in isolation, but only in terms of relationship. Class, therefore, is not a thing, but an activity. It's a verb rather than a noun. And he briefly demonstrates this relationality of class by looking at the struggles of 1840s Nelson and rural incendiarism in the late 19th century. Next on our list is Cynthia Farquhar's and Michaela Selway's Against the Odds, New Zealand's First Women Doctors, brought out with Massey University Press, where they trace the lives of the diverse experiences of 175 women graduates from the University of Otago's medical school, exploring the barriers they encountered, as well as their amazing contributions to medical knowledge, practice and science. And then next on our list we have John Henning's Mr. Burns Mill, a New Zealand labour history, brought out with Old Mechanic. John Henning's book contains 4 essays. The first essay focuses on 19th century British labour history and its influences here. The next looks at the relation between capital and labour and the moral issues embedded in that conflict. The third, and I think most, the one that really struck readers, us most in our subcommittee, was his one on an essay called Mr. Burns' Mill, where he sets up the specific circumstances of that mill to speak to one of the early pieces of legislation, the Employment of Females Act of 1873, to look at how both capital and labour responded to such legislation. And the last section explores the 1890 Sweating Commission. Sadly, John Henning's death meant that he did not get the opportunity to finish the research project that these essays sprang from. However, this work adds substantially to our understanding of labour history. Ngā mihi, John. Next up, we have Tamaiti's powerful memoir, Mana, that he wrote with Toi Kai Rakuiti and Eugene Bingham. In this memoir, Tamaiti examines the centrality of mana, his tūhoitanga on the road as he walks it. He writes, you find mana in how you live your everyday life, how you care for your marakai, how you respect and treat the taiao and other people, and how you stay true to your kaupapa to build mana motuhake, resist colonisation, and address its harms. Mana is also a story about mahi toi. Tami's journey from house painter to mill worker to artist, from ngā tamatoa poster making to setting cars on fire in a collaborative tūhoe exhibition on the Ruatoki confiscation line. Next up is Rebecca McPhee's Hardship and Hope, Stories of Resistance in the Fight Against Poverty in Aotearoa. And she does exactly as the book title says. She balances the harsh reality of colonisation and interlocking systems that create and sustain poverty with 6 stories about extraordinary people who with whakawhanaungatanga, manaakitanga aroha, empower their communities to challenge the status quo and offer whānau-centred solutions. Next up is the film directed by Robert Saki's Pipe River, which brings the story of the Pipe River mine disaster to both national and international audiences. The central characters, based on Anna Osborne and Sonia Rockhouse, are portrayed as tender within family and relationship. Initially suspicious of each other, a bond slowly forms, and then they're taught via Helen Kelly and her team the techniques of presentation and power. They learn how to play the system and taking families along with them in their struggle for justice. And in this regard, Anna and Sonia continue to do a great job for the union movement. And then we have Cheryl Weir's amazing work, Untold Intimacies, a history of sex work in Aotearoa from 1978 to 2008. Cheryl draws on new and archived interviews to reveal both the increasing visibility and unity of a national network of sex workers and the tensions that emerged as sex workers fought for financial, physical and emotional safety. She makes a really important contribution to our understanding of the validity of sex work, the agency of those who work in the industry, and the complexity of individuals' experiences. Wow, what a list! Okay, so it's wordsmithing by the time, huh? All right. Ta-da! And the winner of the 2026 Burt Roth Award goes to Rosemary Beard, The Middle of Nowhere. Stories of working on the Manapodi Hydro project. Congratulations, Rosemary. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit more about it. But clap, yes, clap. So you remember I say that she draws on a whole wealth of oral interviews. And she does that to really fully explore the work and social cultures that people built in that isolated environment. So she covers men's camps, of course, so these really masculine environments, almost entirely free of women, but also included the Wanganala, a former Trans-Tasman ship that was used as housing. And so this ship brought another men's work culture to the cove because many of the ship's caterers were gay men. She also discusses the lives of women who also came to live in the construction village nearby, the wives of those workers and so forth. This story is also a story of global capitalism, those American companies that ran the projects. The power station enabled the opening of Tiwai Point aluminium smelter, which processes material from Australia, the vast majority of which is then exported. Like all stories of global capitalism, it is also an environmental story. The mining and processing of aluminium in Aotearoa and Australia has reshaped environments. This book ends by listing the 18 men who died building the Manapodi power station, bringing attention to the price they paid for the electricity that we still use today. The most important argument underlying this book is that the lives of the people who lived there mattered. The men who built the dam, and the reproductive labour, both from women and gay men, that was essential to this project. Reading this book and listening to their voices speak to us from the page provides a deep and rich picture of a 9-year period that has many connections with the past, with the present, and with the future. Ngā mihi! Whew, what a work. So I hope you're all inspired to go and have a bit of reading. And I will be in touch with Rosemary to send her the gift that we give to those learners.
It gives me enormous pleasure to introduce the amazing Grace Miller, who's done all sorts of amazing mahi, but in particular, when I first got my job here,
A long time ago now.
a long time ago, I got given the most amazing PhD thesis to examine by this incredible woman here, all on about the families of the Waterfront Lockout. So Grace has written some amazing articles that have come out of that work on the families from the waterfront dispute in 1951, and has a wealth to share with us, and is currently working on a book, and I can't wait to read it. But I'll hand over to you now, Grace.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Kia ora koutou. I'm really, one of the things I've been thinking about as I've tried to write my book and think about why it's relevant, one of my starting points is that 1951 is a very different time from now. There was a newly elected national government who faced a cost of living crisis that they didn't know what to do with, and all the actions they took made it worse. So, as you understand, a very different time, and I think that is part of why I think it is relevant today, but possibly not in direct ways. And I'll explain a couple of examples. So one of the things that I found fascinating, the trigger for the 1951 waterfront dispute was about cost of living. It was basically about who was going to pay or who was going to benefit from an increased prosperity in the post-war period. This is in 1950, in May, the government, the new national government, they introduced they reduced subsidies and price controls, and so all items of food went up. At the same time, the Korean War broke out, and there was the Korean wool boom. So it was a time of real prosperity for New Zealand, and the question is who would benefit for it, and who would have the advantages of it. And again, the parallels are sort of uncanny. I did the maths comparing how much butter went up in about the 18 months to the beginning of 1951, and it was almost the cost of $1 of butter, inflation adjusted, for 500 grams of butter today is about the same as £1, and it had gone up about the same amount. And there's a couple of things there. One is that we may live in very difficult times, but we don't live in exceptional times. And I think it can be really helpful to not see ourselves as the only people who have ever struggled, but to see ourselves through a ribbon of continuity. And that's one of the things that I want to draw out of today. And the other is about times of crisis, because it's not a coincidence that this government and the 1951 government were both facing cost of living crisis. Both of those things were about both forming crises and forming consensus. So 1951 was at the very end of forming the post-war consensus that then ruled until the late 70s, where we had another time of crisis, and then the neoliberal consensus formed. And I think, and lots of people do as well, that we are now, one of the things we're now seeing is that neoliberal consensus breaking down in the face of climate change. And I think that understanding that it's not, that there is actually much similar between New Zealand now and 1951, because if I went into all the things which was different, It's kind of like only the place names are the same. There are so many differences. But that it is useful to understand that people have lived through crises before, and that is part of what we're going through now. And so to look at this, I'm going to just pull on 3 threads. I'm going to be relatively brief. I'm just going to pull on 3 threads about the history of 1951, which I think are useful and help explain why it matters today. So the first, I just want to talk about what a broad sense of who was involved in the dispute very early on. So, as most people here probably know, in 1951 the watersiders wouldn't work overtime, the employers locked them out, and the government sent the military to work on the wharf. So what you had, not very far away from here, is you had a whole bunch of ships in the harbour which were being worked by military labour. But military labour only took the goods from the ships to the wharfs. The question was, what was going to happen to it next? And that is where what you saw, particularly in March 1951, is you saw the dispute kind of snake out, following the goods out through New Zealand, through other parts of New Zealand society. So the first question is, who would move it? The railway workers wouldn't move it. They couldn't get any drivers to use it, to move it, any members of the drivers' union to move it. So it had to be moved by owner-driver trucks. Then it would be moved somewhere. Who would touch it? Who would work on it? Who would use it? So, and we have here the power of the decisions the workers were made. So in both Wellington and Auckland, gasworks decided that they would not, the workers in the gasworks met, had a meeting, had a decision, deciding they would not move they would not work the coal. In this case, in Wellington, they were like, well, if the gas workers won't work the coal, then there's no point in unloading it. So they unloaded other goods instead. And what this meant was there was actually no gas for industry in Auckland and Wellington. Goes out in about mid-March, or 8th of March. The coal was there. It was on the ship. It was on the Kaitangata, which we can see here. But the question was it going to be moved and was it going to be worked? And what happened is a series of workers, so harbour board workers, they were workers who were not watersiders, but they did other tasks on the harbour board workers. Would they move it? They wouldn't move it, and so the army did their roles. And then the coal was even more black. So the Auckland Gasworks had met, and then they voted to accept the coal and work the coal and have a discussion, and then they decided, and then the harbour board workers, so they met again. But they decided that they would still do that by a very small margin. And when the coal turned up, half the gas workers at this gasworks left, more than half left, and they would not do the work. They were like, that's not for me. They walked off. I told this story in front of some PSA members, and they were like, oh wow, that's illegal now. And I'm like, oh no, it was illegal then. The difference is not the law on that. The difference is the Reserve Bank Act. The difference is that those men could go and walk. One of the differences, there are many differences, is go and walk and find other jobs. But what happened in workplaces up and down the country is that people met and they had discussions and they took meetings and they made decisions. And this happened in the gasworks, it happened in the Mangakino dam. There's a thread of dam construction through this AGM. It happened on ships, it happened on freezing works, it happened on tyre manufacturers, just this huge long list of people who met and discussed and made decisions. And they made a whole range of decisions. And often they made more than one decision. So often a group voted one way, and then another meeting they voted another way. And the point that I really think is important, there's a couple of points that I want to bring out about that, and I want people to know about that. One is that process of democracy. You know, that process that workers felt like they had a say about what work they were going to do, and they could discuss it collectively. And understanding that that is possible, that you could have that idea, which I think a lot of people who are in the workforce today, it would be unimaginable. That is one of the reasons that I think, one of the threads of this story that I think matters to people today, both that process of making a decision, And too often the decisions in the 1950 Waterfront Lockout by people of all persuasions are showed as being the result of people in leadership positions. And it's not that the Federation of Labour didn't have an influence, they did. They did try to do everything they could to get back to work, but actually the decisions that mattered were being made in workplaces. And those decisions people made matter, what people does matters. All those decisions people made to support or not to support the Watersiders, they all mattered and they all affected how the dispute went back. And I think one of the most important things, I think, as someone who's a unionist and an activist and a historian, has thought a bit about how you tell these stories, one of the important things is not to tell the stories as if the outcome is inevitable. Because if the outcome is inevitable, what we do, it doesn't really matter, you can just go along as the tide. If we did these stories, the thing I want to bring out of these stories is that it wasn't inevitable, and the decisions that people made in those workplaces actually helped decide how New Zealand was going to be right the way down to today. That's the first thread. The second thread, I want to talk a little bit about Steve Watene, George Pittman, and their committee, the Auckland Watersiders Māori Committee. This hasn't got nearly as much attention in the history of 1951 as I think it should have. And basically what it was a group of Māori Watersiders who very quickly, so this is kind of the 2 days after the military have gone onto the wharf, and Steve Watene, he says some organisations should be set up to bring to the notice of the Māori people the struggle in which the union was going on. And the reason he did that is because one of his roles was supporting Māori who wanted to move to the city. He supported lots of people from his iwi and people he knew moving to Auckland. He knew how many Māori there were, particularly around Auckland, who wanted to move to Auckland and for whom those jobs would be attractive. And he thought it was very important that Watersiders took their relationships and tried to persuade Māori who are living in rural areas not to move to the city. As obviously 1951 is happening at the very beginning of mass Māori migration to the cities. And what's incredible about this, it's Thursday at 8:15 a.m. when they have this discussion. On Saturday, so 2 days later, him alongside two other Māori Watersiders, Mr Hogg and Mr Chapman, reported that they had left Auckland. They had driven to Paeroa, Waihi, Tauranga, Whakatane, Opotiki, Teko and Rotorua, spoken to people locally in each of those places and driven back. Now that tells you something about the relationships that they had with people and their preparedness to use them to advance the Watersiders' cause. There's lots that I could say about the Māori Committee, but I just want to make one point today, and their incredible work. One point today is that their success was very mixed. There were 90 Māori Watersiders before the dispute. Auckland had an almost entirely new branch, but almost nobody got back to work. And there were 400 to 600 Māori Watersiders after. So a lot of Māori worked as strikebreakers. There's a lot of interesting stuff about why that might have happened. But one of the things that I find fascinating is, this is an extract from a document called Lessons of the 1951 Waterfront Lockout. It's written for an international audience and it's written by communists who were very involved in the dispute. That much you can tell just from the dispute, but from the document. But one of, if you look at this, you'll find a lot about how the language and understanding that Pākehā leftists had of Māori in the 1950s. But actually the thing that I want to draw people's attention to is the end. Because at the end, what they basically say is, it'll be a real problem for the union movement if Māori are not unionists, because they want to move to the cities and they will move to the cities. And it is our responsibility to act in solidarity. It is our responsibility to build that relationship. The responsibility lies on the organised working class to see that this becomes general. So this is in a moment of defeat. These men are making, and they are all men, these men are making a decision that they have to act proactively and they have to build the relationships of solidarity, and that's on them. And that's what they take out of of the lockout. And I think, and this is one of the things that I want to really kind of draw out, is that there is a real thread from that moment and that decision and that experience to what you see in the 60s and 70s in terms of the union movement acting in solidarity with Māori struggle. There is a history that goes back earlier, and Sir Bell's documented a lot of amazing stuff with this, but in terms of the drivers' union and their anti-racist work, and in terms of people like Tom Poata doing Māori solidarity work on union time through to Bastion Point. Now, all that work was being done by Māori unionists, but it needed to be supported by Pākehā unionists in leadership positions, and I think that they did that because of that experience. And to me, again, part of this is just about the importance of saying the decisions that people make mattered. And that today, I think, in various ways, quite complicated ways, the union movement owes a lot to those decisions by Steve Watene, George Pittman and the Māori Committee to organise in solidarity in 1951, and then the decision, the lesson that some of those Pākehā in leadership positions took, that this means that we have to have more solidarity. We have to take, well, what messed us up is that we didn't do before. You can't, as people say, you can't fatten a pig on market day. You can't go the first time you go, and it wasn't exactly the first time, but you needed to prove yourself as your solidarity with Māori struggle. And I think the union movement today owes a lot to all those decisions, and it's also something that I think everybody can hold in terms of the importance of the work we do and the long-term impact it can have, even if you are in a time of defeat. Final thread, I just want to talk a little bit about Regulation 8, which is probably the most notorious part of the 1951 Waterfront Lockout, which was criminalising giving any money to the union, giving any money to any individual who was, or to the benefit of any individual, which was widely understood as making it illegal to give money to families whose husbands were watersiders. And that was one of the most notorious actions, and it shows how far the state went. It was a huge loss, but the state really used extraordinary powers. And there's just a couple of things I want to talk about with this. The first is, again, we're back in building dam land. The first is that it was widely ignored. So this is Roxburgh Hydro Dam. And you can imagine, again, in 1951 was a very different time. Your pay did not appear in your bank account, but someone had to bring it in a pay car and drop it off where you worked. And what this meant was that the union car could follow along afterward and could collect money as well. And that's what they did. Or another example, a former Burt Roth award nominee, Renee, the fabulous playwright, at age 7, she broke the regulations when she took chops to her aunt whose husband was a watersider. But the point that those are not the most extraordinary people who ignored the regulations, because at the same time, many landlords, many credit firms, many grocers were, despite the regulations, either letting people go into debt and not pay their bills. So grocers routinely gave lots of extra food to people without charging them. Landlords did not evict people, and places like farmers and places like that where people had hire purchase didn't reclaim people's furniture. So there was quite a lot of, we can do a lot about why, but there's social norms in there, but that's actually not the point that I want to make. The point I want to make is the most extraordinary person or entity that was routinely advancing credit to watersiders, and that's the state. Because despite passing these extraordinary regulations, which said that you couldn't give any money to watersiders. And despite like banning all communication, there is one tool they didn't use, and they didn't use the tools of the welfare state. So the state was a lot of watersiders, landlords, and it did not evict anyone, and it did not reclaim them. This is the Relief Committee book, and this is the very partial payments that are being made. This is a small fraction of what people actually owed, and no one was evicted. So that's one step. The next example, is that actually, for every woman who had children, the state was paying her 10 shillings a week per child family benefit, even while saying it was illegal to give her or her husband any money. And it does, again, that probably, you can put that one up to, there's no way of them figuring out who's married to watersiders or who's not. But it's interesting when there was that level of oppression that it doesn't even seem to have come up. And on top of that, and perhaps most weirdly, there was a sick benefit. The people were on the sick benefit, and in a very routine kind of way, if you were on strike, you were denied a sick benefit. And that was kind of a routine thing that happened. It wasn't made at the ministerial level, it was made kind of by the administration of the welfare system. And after some time, after a few months, they in fact instituted a special sick benefit for people who would have been, for watersiders who were locked out, for people who were denied it because they would have been locked out and wouldn't have been getting anyway. So you have the state prepared to use all this power against watersiders and not prepared to use the power of the welfare state. And to me that's fascinating, because this is a real moment in the history of welfare state, and I think it's sort of a dog that didn't bark, so nobody's noticed. Because the money was going to women, nobody's really noticed that the state was giving all this support to families at the same time as criminalising these families. And I think it's a real moment in the formation of a consensus about the welfare state, because National only got in 2 years before. If they'd used the power of the welfare state against watersiders, that would have smashed the consensus, and then we wouldn't have had 40 years of consensus over the welfare state. Instead, the welfare state would have fallen at the first hurdle. And we can talk, I don't know why that decision was made, but I think what it shows, I think that they probably wouldn't have, that the welfare state was so popular and so important to people that they could literally criminalise giving out leaflets, but they couldn't take away people's family benefits and expel them from state housing. And to me that's fascinating. And it's this real moment in building a consensus. And you don't necessarily know when you're part of a struggle that is building the new reality, you actually don't know how that's going to go. And I think that one of the things I want to do in writing the history of 1951 is bring up things like that, bring up moments where it helped form the world that followed that people don't necessarily know about. And so just to finish off, those are just 3 stories. I've got heaps more, obviously. It's a fascinating time. But the reasons that I want to tell, I think that the Waterfront Lockout still matters. One is that I think telling, like I said, if we tell stories of struggle, it makes people feel like we can survive. You know, I think there are some people talk about this government as if it's the worst government that there's ever been. And I'm like, you haven't looked at the 20th century. But it's not just a joke. I think that matters, because if we think that this is the worst government that's ever been, it can be really depressing and demoralising. Whereas if the story is, actually we've survived a lot, actually people have organised and struggled and lost, and we've got a lot even out of some of those times that we've lost, then I think that helps people when thinking about how to react in these moments of crisis. It helps people keep going, it helps people stay away from despair. And the last thing is, and I always try and tell these stories, is that I think that the decisions that people make, not just like Jock Barnes or Sydney Holland or whoever, or Fintan Patrick Walsh. But the decisions that every single one of those workers made, whether to work or not, they mattered and they affected the history of New Zealand. And I think emphasising that the decisions that we make matter and can have an effect that we don't necessarily even know and shape decades to come, like Steve Watney's work did, I think that helps. I think that helps take us forward in moments of struggle, and it helps in this moment where, again, we're fighting a terrible government, and we have to think that it's possible to build a better world out of this crisis and not think that things are inevitably going to get worse. Thank you.
Alan Windsor, the president of the Maritime Union Veterans. Actually, a speech that's been written by Mick Williams, the past National Secretary of the Seamen's Union, and who works with Alan for the veterans. So, kia ora.
Well, it's a pleasure to come here and read Mick's dissertation. This was given to the Maritime New Zealand meeting on May Day in Littleton this year, and that was a meeting recognised 75 years since the 1951 lockout, and I'll just carry on with it. Happy May Day to all, especially to the unions, both national and international, that continue to stand in solidarity with the struggles of the 1951 lockout. May the 1st serves as a powerful reminder of the labour movement's victories and ongoing challenges. So, not a public holiday in Aotearoa, New Zealand, May Day remains deeply significant, particularly for maritime workers who have long led the charge for union activism. This year, however, we face new obstacles. We're up against one of the most anti-worker governments in decades, slashing workers' rights, prioritising corporate interests, and sowing division amongst the working class. This is eerily similar to the tactics of the 1951 national government, as today we face a far-right coalition partner driving an anti-union agenda. As the late Bob Crow once said, if you fight, you won't always win, but if you don't fight, you will always lose. The 1951 lockout was brutal, a 151-day struggle that saw workers' families caught in the crossfire. The government not only locked out workers, but also made it illegal to offer support to their families. Prosecuting anyone who did, the impact on the children of Watersiders was devastating. Yet, the workers didn't stand alone. Solidarity came from unions in New Zealand and abroad, including the WWF and the SUA in Australia. Alan Allport, a key figure in the struggle, brought vital funds over from Australia on board his ship, the Wanganella. So there's the name that's just been mentioned earlier. When the 50th anniversary of the lockout was marked 25 years ago, we gathered with those who had lived through the fight. Alan Allport, Jack Black, Bill Martin, Bill Anderson, Tommy Heppenstall, and many others. Their courage and resilience continue to inspire us. Their memories remind us that we fight not just for ourselves, but for the future generations who carry this torch forward. 75 years ago, the ruling class launched a calculated and a brutal assault against organised waterfront labour. The 1951 Waterfront Lockout wasn't a simple industrial dispute. It was an act of class war, orchestrated by the state and employers to dismantle one of the most powerful and disciplined sections of the working class in Aotearoa. The Watersiders were targeted because they were organised, united and capable of exercising real control over their labour. Their crime was collective power. The response was repression, lockouts, emergency regulations, censorship, police and military intervention, and the deliberate starvation of workers and their families. These were not mistakes, but are calculated weapons of control designed to break resistance and reassert capitalist power on the waterfront. For MUN's members today, history is not just a memory. It's embedded in the political fabric of modern waterfront. The conditions we face today, labour hire, fragmented employment, constant surveillance, legal restrictions on union power are a legacy of that defeat. The measures were designed with a single aim to prevent maritime workers from ever again wielding collective power that the Watersiders once held. This anniversary isn't about mourning, it's about recognition and resolve. The lesson of 1951 is clear. When the maritime workers organise effectively, the response from employers and the state is force. The answer, then and now, is unity, discipline and unbreakable solidarity of the working class. The Maritime Union exists because the struggle didn't end in 1951. It went underground, it regrouped, rebuilt. Remembering the lockout is not an act of nostalgia, it's an act of defiance and a commitment to continue the fight for worker power on the waterfront. 75 years ago, the waterfront workers stood at the centre of one of the most defining class struggles in Aotearoa New Zealand's history. The 1951 lockout wasn't just any industrial dispute. It was a coordinated assault on organised labour carried out by the state, employers and imperial capital with the explicit goal of destroying the maritime unionism. For MUN's members today, the ancient history weren't ancient history, but they're woven into the fabric of our struggle. The systems under which the maritime workers now operate, the legal restrictions on collective action, labour hire and surveillance were shaped in the aftermath of that defeat. In 1951, New Zealand's economy was tied deeply to Britain's imperial trading system. Meat, dairy, wool were all exported to Britain aboard ships owned by companies like Shaw, Sutherland Albion, P&O, Blue Star Line and the New Zealand Shipping Corporation. These shipping companies weren't just neutral commercial entities, they were pillars of imperial capital. Their profits depended on controlling labour and ensuring rapid turnaround times. In suppressing waterfront militancy for them, the New Zealand waterfront wasn't just a workplace, it was a key point in a global supply chain. Control over the waterfront labour was non-negotiable. British ship owners had a long history of dealing with dock struggles, from the London dock strikes in the 1880s to the interwar period. Dock workers had shown time and time again that organised maritime labour could challenge authority and inspire working class resistance. By 1951, New Zealand Watersiders were seen as part of a global problem that needed a decisive solution. Their solution wasn't compromise, it was destruction. And the Wellington waterfront here was particularly significant as the nation's capital and a major port. It sat at the intersection of political authority and maritime trade. A strong, self-confident workforce operating right by Parliament posed a direct challenge to both the employers and the state's ideological control. A disruption on Wellington's wharves couldn't be tolerated. It symbolised that working class power could assert itself at the very heart of national life. During the lockout, the national government showed no pretence of neutrality. Under the guise of law and order, It mobilised the full force of the state against the waterfront workers and their supporters. Emergency regulations were imposed, union publications were censored, the workers and their supporters were censored, solidarity actions were criminalised, police and military personnel were stationed on the wharves, and workers and their families were deliberately starved into submission. These actions weren't about maintaining order, they were about defending capital and ensuring an uninterrupted flow of imperial trade. The outcome of the lockout gave employers exactly what they wanted. The waterside workers was deregistered. The union-controlled hiring hall was destroyed. Militants were blacklisted. Collective organisation was dismantled. The waterfront was no longer a place of worker power. It became a site of surveillance, discipline and compliance. It wasn't simply a defeat, it was class punishment, designed to ensure that the maritime workers would never again wield collective control over their labour. As Dick Scott wrote in 151 Days, the lockout was an epic fight against fascism, a calculated assault on a militant trade unionism. Its purpose wasn't reform, it was eradication. Yet, Maritime Union didn't die in 1951. It regrouped, reorganised and rebuilt. The lessons learnt from the lockout: unity, solidarity, the importance of international support, the inevitability of state repression shaped the strategies that eventually led to the resurgence of strong maritime unionism, including the formation of the now Maritime Union of New Zealand. Why this anniversary matters for MUN's members today: the 70th anniversary is not just a commemoration of past struggles, but a reminder of what maritime workers are capable of when they're united. It's also a stark reminder that the conditions that we face today, fragmentation of labour, surveillance and legal restrictions on union power, are a direct result of repression faced in 1951. Remembering 51 is an act of political clarity. It shows working class power on the waterfront was broken once and it can be rebuilt again. The lockout of 51 was meant to end working class power on the wharves. It didn't. It forced the power to adapt, survive and rise again. And that was the speech that Mick gave at the 75th. When we was there, we was also celebrated an LP which was partially funded by the Maritime Union by a guy called Adam McGrath, and it's called Wrecker Songs. There's a copy of the LP. It's fantastic. I haven't been able to get some more copies of it. I've talked to our local branch and they've got them on order, but you can go on YouTube and dial up his name, Adam McGrath, and all these songs that he's had. He's in a group called the Eastern, but this one's just made under his name, and it says songs from and for the Maritime Union of New Zealand, and it's a cracking LP. He's got a really good style, you know what I mean, because what he does in this is not only talk about, you know, the fisticuffs on the job and standing firm, but also what happened to all the women and kids and how they supported the workers in times of struggle. So it was a great effort. Just to say, the Wanganella, what a fantastic ship. When I was 17, I had a chance to go on board the Wanganella in Deep Cove. I was delivering tunnel cement on a vessel down there, and with a guy called Mad Mick, he was a concreter down there and took me over the Wanganella and up the tail race of the Manapuri power scheme, which they just talked about. And it was certainly a big job, and it was a fantastic effort by all them workers down there, and they stood solid the whole time they worked down there too. Right, thank you very much.
Thank you for those two amazing talks. Another round of applause, please. So that's it from us. Yeah, any last words? No? Go and have a wonderful evening. Rest of your
Which
evening.
side are you on, boys? Which side are you on?
Like their wives and kids to live as human beings.